Think you used to date the king or queen of manipulating liars? Listen to this story. November 2nd, 2016 was a normal day for the Papini family of four. Husband and father Keith Papini gave his wife and kids a kiss goodbye and headed out towards his job at Best Buy around 6:50 that morning. Keith's wife Sherri took their two kids, who were 2 and 4, to daycare, and then she came back to the house so she could go for a run. Later that evening, when Keith got home from work, he saw Sherri's car in the driveway, so he fully expected Sherri and the kids to greet him at the door like they did every evening. Unfortunately, he was met with silence. Sherri, who had been married to Keith since October 2009, was nowhere to be found. Keith starts to panic when he realizes that the kids were never picked up from daycare, which was totally unlike anything Sherri would ever do. Any hope of this being just a misunderstanding went out the window, though, when Keith found Sherri's phone and earbuds, which had blonde hair wrapped in it, near their mailbox, which was a mile from their home. Keith freaked out and decided it was time to call 911. Within hours of the call to 911, nearly 100 volunteers from the community had come together to search for Sherri. Shasta County Sheriff's Office spent hours and hours investigating the case, completed dozens of interviews, and followed up on nearly 800 tips. Despite how hard they tried, minutes turned into hours, hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks with no sign of Sherri. Very early on in the investigation, Keith agreed to take a lie detector test to prove his innocence so police could focus their efforts on other leads. 22 days had passed, and admittedly, police said they figured they were looking for Sherri's body as they no longer thought she was alive. But then, just over 3 weeks after she disappeared, a bombshell. At 4:30 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, still wearing chains around her waist and restraints around her wrists and ankles, Sherri was released by the captors and found running down County Road 17, which was nearly 150 miles from where she was abducted. This poor woman had been tortured. Nothing short of tortured. She was emaciated, covered in bruises, burns, and rashes. She had chains around her waist and clamps around her wrists and ankles. Her nose was broken, her long blonde hair had been chopped off, and shockingly, she had been branded on her right shoulder. Sherri says she had gone running that morning. As she was nearing the mailbox, 2 Hispanic women, one between 20 and 30 years of age and the other between 40 and 50 years of age, pulled a gun on Sherri and forced her into a dark-colored SUV. Sherri told police that the woman spoke Spanish the majority of the time, which prohibited her from understanding most of their conversation. Sherri told police that the older woman was ridiculously mean to her and that her breath smelled like sweetened coffee. Once in captivity, Sherri spent the majority of her time chained in a room. She said she specifically remembered smelling the laundry detergent on the pillowcase they used to cover her head. She says she never saw the faces of her captors because they either had masks on or Sherri's head was covered with a pillowcase. She could recall details though. For example, the woman would often play mariachi music. The night before Sherri's release, her captors were arguing. They were arguing over Sherri's need for medical care. It got so heated that the younger woman shot the older one. Sherri didn't know if the gunshot killed the older woman, but the younger woman then let Sherri go, which is how she was ultimately rescued. Investigators spent months trying to, 1, track down these 2 Hispanic women who had committed this crime, and 2, establish a motive for the kidnapping, but absolutely nothing would shake loose. Police recognized there were very odd things about this case. For one, being kidnapped by 2 women for no apparent reason is statistically extremely unlikely to happen. Also, it was odd that there was no tire or drag marks in the gravel where the abduction took place. Video surveillance caught the moment after Sherri was released by her captors, and it showed her appearing to be running freely for help, even though when she was found, her arm was still chained to her waist. Despite these inconsistencies, Sherri stuck to her story and police continued to look for the 2 women who had abducted Sherri. Returning to normal life proved to be difficult. Although friends and family were grateful for Sherri being home, the trauma she endured had caused massive PTSD and anxiety. Sherri would get these terrible tremors. She refused to meet anyone new. She refused to make eye contact with people. There were blankets over all the windows. The lights had to be on all hours of the night. And she wouldn't even eat black beans because it reminded her of what she was fed in captivity. The pressure from the community was mounting and people were really starting to question Sherri's story. It was then leaked that back in 2003, Sherri's mother, Loretta Grafe, reported to police that Sherri was harming herself and then telling people that her mother had done it. Loretta was petrified someone was going to believe her and then she would get in trouble for abusing her daughter, even though it was Sherri doing it to herself the whole time. Then, on the tail end of that news, someone found an old article from 2003 that Sherri had posted to a pro-skinhead blog. Sherri wrote that she would often get into fights with Latinos because they were, quote, jealous that she was drug-free, white, and proud. She also made a comment that said, quote, being white is my family, my roots, my way of life. When police questioned her about it, of course, she denied writing it. Then, a few months later, in 2017, police found a clue that would blow up the whole damn case. Male DNA, not belonging to Keith Papini, was found on the sweatpants Sherri was wearing the morning she was rescued. This was a huge lead for investigators because Sherri was adamant her only two abductors were the two Hispanic women. It took investigators more than 2 years to get a positive hit on the DNA. On August 13, 2020, 3 years and 8 months since her rescue, the FBI revealed that the DNA sample on Sherri's pants came back to none other than Sherri's ex-boyfriend, James Reyes. Almost immediately, James folded like a cheap lawn chair and admitted to helping Sherri run away. Sherri told him her husband was physically and sexually abusing her. He picked her up and took her back to his house in Costa Mesa, which was nearly 600 miles away. Once there, she shaved her head, starved herself to appear emaciated, repeatedly hit herself with objects to cause bruising, had James shoot hockey pucks off her body to cause injury, hit herself in the face with a hockey stick to break her nose, burned her own arms, and even branded herself using a wood-burning tool that they bought at freaking Hobby Lobby. When asked by the police why he did this, James said he thought they might get back together. Shortly before Thanksgiving, Sherri told James she missed her kids and wanted to go home. So he drove to a back road some 150 miles from her house. She opened the door and took off running. According to James, she didn't even say goodbye. On March 2, 2022, Sherri Papini was arrested at her kids' recital. She was charged with making false statements to a federal agent and mail fraud. She was released on a $120,000 bail and ultimately confessed to staging the entire event. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay $300,000 in restitution. Keith Papini filed for divorce a month later and told Good Morning America that, quote, she made us all believe that her story was true. Every single day she committed to the lie. As if this story can't get any more twisted, Keith recently shared one other piece of information about Sherri, which could be the most upsetting of all. One night, after Sherri's arrest, Keith was tucking their daughter into bed. He pushed himself off the bed to stand up and made this grunt noise because he had hurt his shoulder. His daughter said, "Daddy, are you sick? You should try mommy's trick." Keith was super confused, didn't know what she was talking about. So this little girl jumps out of bed, goes into the bathroom, grabs the rubbing alcohol, holds it up to her dad's face and tells him to inhale it. She ends up telling her dad that Sherri would make her inhale the rubbing alcohol to get sick. Turns out, Sherri liked the attention of taking sick children to the doctor's office. Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Sherri has served her time and was released in October 2023. Keith has full custody of the two children who are now aged 11 and 9. According to Keith, the kids see their mother once a month in a controlled, supervised environment.